trust the media, they're all full of lies. What do you know a little bit, all hoping you die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Two-party system, what the hell is that? Votes just the same, nothing but crap. They tell you what to think, they control what you see. Why don't you think and heard it on TV? I said live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die. Live free or die.
Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting edition of Hardfire TV on Brooklyn Free Speech Media. Today, 1 year after the Ukraine situation started, we've now been there 1 year, and time flies. And so this program will be our March 2023 program, and the topic is Ukraine as Vietnam, ? So I'm the oldest one here, so I remember Vietnam. Okay, Ukraine is Vietnam. Today we're going to update our assessment at the 1 year point of the Ukraine situation. And at the time, 1 year ago, we said it's going to continue. But why? Because the military industrial complex likes building toys and exploding toys in real time. At the time, we decided it's not in the U.S. best interest to engage in Ukraine because our national safety wasn't a concern, is not a concern. So today with me on Hardfire TV to discuss Ukraine is Vietnam, we have John Clifton. Hello, John. Welcome.
Hi there. Peace and freedom.
John's been on Hardfire now for about 10 or 15 years, talking about especially foreign affairs stuff. And Brooklyn Vlad, welcome back.
Peace.
Vlad's been talking with us on about the Ukraine situation. And joining us for the first time, we have Dave DeCamp. Welcome, Dave.
Hey, thanks for having me.
Okay, so breaking news. Did anybody read that report or the
From Seymour Hersh,
Seymour Hersh of
Yeah.
the My Lai massacre, the Seymour Hersh.
Speaking of Vietnam,
So it does tie in together. It is. So we already answered the question.
yeah.
Seymour Hersh decided.
What did it?
Seymour Hersh, he's the one that won the Pulitzer Prize for discovering the My Lai massacre in Vietnam. And he recently said that the Nord Stream 2 pipeline explosion was, anybody want to say it?
Well, he detailed pretty well in this report that the United States blew it up. So it's Seymour Hersh, and he published it on Substack, which was interesting. But he is, a legendary investigative journalist, and he cited one source, and of course, the U.S. is denying it. But there's a lot of details in that report that line up, with the way things went. And it basically says President Biden ordered his team to come up with a plan to bomb the Nord Stream pipelines that connect Russia and Germany. They carry natural gas.
Exactly.
Well, they used to, but carry natural gas. And he ordered his team to plan to bomb it before Russia invaded Ukraine, which is kind of the big revelation or allegation. It's still not confirmed, but one thing Hersh pointed out, he wrote a little blog post explaining why he put it on Substack. And he said, because he also revealed Abu Ghraib, that the U.S. was torturing prisoners there. Wow. He said when he first reported that, the Pentagon, they all denied it as well. And then it eventually was confirmed. So he has a pretty good track record. But yeah, it says U.S. Navy divers planted explosives on the pipeline in June 2022 during NATO exercises. and then it was detonated by a Norwegian spy plane that dropped a sonar buoy in September. So it's a pretty huge. I mean, that's it. How is that not an act of war against Russia? I don't know.
Oh, it's definitely a war. We're definitely in a proxy war. Hence the ties to Vietnam. I mean, it's very similar in that we have people on the ground dying, Ukrainians dying, and Russian soldiers, just like we had during Vietnam, the Vietnamese dying, and American soldiers.
And the United States military created its own. What did we do in Vietnam? What did we blow up to trigger that war again?
Oh, Tonkin.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Gulf of Tonkin. That's right.
Which was also denied initially as being a legitimate story, and then later on, what do you know? Conspiracy theorists.
The truth sometimes wills out. Yeah,
I think there were two important tells with this story. One is that I believe the operators who executed the dropping the bomb in there and all were Navy personnel who were not part of the regular detail of people who do these kinds of operations. Because if it was, I understand that they would have had to report it to the appropriate places ahead of time to get authorization, and it would have been a more transparent process. And that tells me that this was a secret operation that was done for the sake of getting away with it. The other part of this is that's horrible is that this is really the only story that has come out about who did the bombing that any media source has done. This is the first time we got something, and it had to come from an independent journalist like Cy Hirsch. And what happened to all the other news organs, especially in Europe, who were chiefly affected by this? And maybe there should have been some people from Russia too, but maybe they already knew what the deal was. They just waited for somebody else to.
Well, I think we're giving the current president of the United States too much credit for doing that. The Chinese, the director of this program sometimes listen to Chinese conspiracy theory stuff, which there's two conspiracy theories, one that's proved correct over time and the other one that just keeps going over time, like the Kennedy. But the Chinese media is reporting it as the CIA directed it.
Okay.
Yeah.
Biden threatened the pipeline beforehand.
Yeah, he did. That was one thing when after they exploded, people were showing, there's video of President Biden saying, if Russia invades Ukraine, we're going to bring an end to the Nord Stream pipeline, one way or another. And apparently, according to that Seymour Hersh report, when he said that, the team that was planning it, they were all like shocked that he said that publicly. They said it was basically him just announcing that they were planning to bomb this pipeline. And then after the pipelines blew up, the US media, tried to blame it on Russia and called the idea that America was responsible a conspiracy theory that was being pushed by the Kremlin. Even though it made no sense for Russia to do it. It's their own pipeline. They own it.
Yeah,
and
I was wondering about that.
Putin had all the leverage in the world by having, they were turned off. Nord Stream 2 never delivered gas to Germany, but Nord Stream 1 did, and it was turned off a few weeks before the explosion. So he had all the reason in the world to keep those pipelines intact, because that's a way he could have divided, the U.S. from its European allies. If things got really bad in Germany and they said, all right, we're going to need some of that cheap Russian gas, it put Putin in like a great position. So yeah, there's no way. And they're pricing how to repair it now. So,
so you think that it was just a foolish maneuver? I mean, why, and we're supposed to be the policemen of the world.
Yeah. It's really incredible. I mean, I hope that there's some more confirmation of it that they can't ignore it and can't just be like, oh, it's not true, because it really rips the mask off the whole thing. Like
it was in the New York Post.
It would help if Sweden came forward and divulged the results of its investigation, because I think that country was the only other country that tried to investigate this, and then they basically announced their findings was basically. We can't tell you much. Everything is so confidential that it would be harmful to somebody's national security, Sweden's and some other entities. And the question obviously comes up of, well, why would you say that unless somebody was putting pressure on you to not say anything else? And who would be in a position to do that? Are they afraid of Russia? Are they afraid of NATO? Are they afraid of, which party put the pressure on Sweden to bottle the disclosures coming out of its own investigation? Again, which is one of the few investigations that were done as to who did this thing.
Yeah, Sweden's trying to join NATO right now, so they're not going to want to upset anybody.
Sweden wants to join NATO now. That's what we said 1 year ago. Was the NATO should have gone away with the Cold War, and then we promised to contain NATO, and then we kept expanding it more and more towards Russia, and then blowing up a Russian pipeline, according to Seymour Hersh.
Does this open up to retaliation now? Because this isn't a Ukrainian pipeline. This is a Russian pipeline.
Yeah, that's a big question. Yeah,
big difference between something done against the Ukrainians or within Ukraine. Mm-hmm. This is a Russian item.
One thing is certain: if Russia had bombed U.S. energy infrastructure, it would have been lights out. We're already in World War III. In terms of at least the rhetoric war, the propaganda war over who's right, who's wrong, who's the bad guy, who's not. But apparently, if U.S. is trying to play this double game of doing black ops and then saying they had anything to do with the black ops, and they think this is 1953 instead of 2023, and nobody notices that these kind of things are still going on, and they'll just let it slide because we haven't admitted to it. I think Shai Hersh, his study is a breakthrough in this whole matter, and I'm sorry that it had to be stuck on Substack. Even 10 years ago, I think Hersh could have published this on in the New Yorker or somewhere.
Washington Post.
Yeah, but now it's like you can't get anything on legacy media that's really true and really fundamentally critiques the U.S. government.
Yeah, and they're like going after him now. I saw an article, I think it was Business Insider today, that said, a discredited U.S. journalist made a claim on a blog, like they call it a blog post, to make it just sound like it's not that important. Because they're not happy with him from his reporting in Syria. He had a big report about how rebels that the U.S. backed basically staged one of the sarin gas attacks. And then before that, it was something, I forget exactly what, but it was with the raid that they say killed Osama bin Laden. He had some reporting on that too.
Oh, yeah. He said
exactly what that was.
He said that, reported that bin Laden was in Pakistan under Pakistan authorities, and that Pakistan leaked it to the CIA. In other words, that the CIA didn't discover it on their own, but they were told by the government of Pakistan where bin Laden was.
Oh, okay.
They just rampaged in and forgot the Pakistanis. We're just gonna do this on our own with our troops, and there you go. And we're off to the races again with secrecy about what actually happened.
I learned something new. I call it it's the sociology of social problems. So in order to get the state to act, in order for the state to be able to act without checks and balances, they need to create social problems, right? And a war, people fighting in Eastern Europe or Western Europe, Central Europe is not really our problem, but it's become our problem. The sociology is all about studying power. And so whatever you can do to expand your power, and we've just given quite a few examples of this. And with the problem being Russia, or the problem being the red balloon. What's worse than a spy balloon is a communist spy balloon.
Yeah, when it comes to like the whole Russia-Ukraine war, and kind of the parallels to Vietnam, like we've seen in the past few weeks, there's been huge escalations of U.S. and NATO involvement, sending the tanks,
the tanks and advisors. You
And
that's
you-
how
Yeah.
Vietnam
Well,
started
exactly. That's what I was going to
United
mention is the
States.
advisors.
advisors.
That's how it
Vietnam
starts.
was
There's
up-
already weapons inspectors on the ground working for the Pentagon that they say are doing on-site inspections. There was reporting in the Intercept. This was never confirmed. Nobody picked it up. That said, and it was buried in their story, that there's U.S. Special Operations Forces in Ukraine. There's been reporting that there's British Special Operations Forces there already. And of course, when we talk about Vietnam, that's how it starts, with the advisors, and everything just kind of escalates from there. And
Well,
we're on this escalation train. It looks like the next thing is fighter jets.
Exactly. And we call it legacy media keeps saying, "Oh, tanks are good." The Economist, tanks are good, but it's not enough, and
Yeah,
it's getting worse. Right?
that's the
And the
message.
thing is, I believe these Abrams tanks, which is now the latest thing that the U.S. announced we're going to be sending over there. I think there's supposed to be a difference. I may be wrong about this, but I mean, there's supposed to be a difference between defensive weapons versus offensive gear, offensive weapons. And the whole point about not sending the offensive stuff months ago when this was being debated was that we didn't want to escalate, or we wanted to control the war this time. And I believe what's her name of Breaking Points, Crystal Ball, recently said on the Joe Rogan podcast. So I'm amazed at this. We were supposed to not send offensive weapons and reconnaissance and staff over there, and now not only are we sending it, you can't even debate why we're doing it, and then unless you want to be called the usual things, the traitor, or
No.
it's weak on military, weak on helping the Ukrainian people and all that.
Yes, it's 1956, us versus them, Cold War, where what the Great Reset. I'm just spouting headlines. The Great Reset, where we're facing a choice between a multipolar world or a unipolar world, and the current president of Ukraine is applied for membership in the World Economic Forum.
Yeah, that's another big thing. So, because, of course, we could talk about how, the military industrial complex is really cashing in on this war, not just that 100 billion that they're spending, but also, all these European countries like the former Soviet republics. The US is telling them, send your old Russian made stuff and you could buy some new nice NATO equipment. But
exactly. I wanted to say that U.S. weapons manufacturing is up 500% in the year we've been discussing this, and our weapons exports are up 50% in the 1 year we've been discussing this.
Right.
Yeah, so it's just a boon.
We're getting rid of old equipment and updating new ones.
Mm-hmm.
In fact, the way I heard it was, we're not even sending existing tanks in the case of the Abrams matter. They're going to build most of the new tanks that they're going to send over there. And why? So that somebody gets to cut a check to the contractors, so they could, do something and make money, as the military industrial complex wants to do. You would think it's
CIA advisors. They're
cheapest thing to do would have been just to send what we have.
Well, a lot of our old stuff was just left in Afghanistan, right? Which is old crap.
I mean, we're joking about this stuff, but how many people are displaced from Ukraine? 3 million, something like that.
Yeah, displaced like refugees. I think in the millions now. I'm not sure though. The number is.
I live in Brooklyn, Sunset Park, Brooklyn, in a co-op building, and my neighbors are a lot of my neighbors are Polish, and they just don't like the weapons going there. You're taking all these weapons and taking them to our part of the world.
Yeah, flooding them in there.
I just want to add one other thing about another parallel with Vietnam is what happens to presidents who exercise even a modicum of resistance to escalation. In Vietnam, we saw JFK, according to many statements, say he wanted to curtail the whole involvement in Vietnam at the advisor stage. And soon after that, there was no more Kennedy. A few years later, you had Nixon, who was not exactly in Kennedy's zone, but even he was succumbing to public pressure and to the issue of the logistics in the early 70s and saying we should negotiate some kind of peace. And it was accomplished by around 72, 73. And shortly after that, he was sort of pushed out via the Watergate scandal. And now, in the last couple of years, you had a president named Trump who, regardless of your opinions about him, seemed to be the least committed to interventionism of the slew of candidates he beat for the Republican nomination in 2016. And he basically wanted to concentrate on domestic issues and with the whole America First theme. And it seems like almost everything in the political establishment has been geared towards keeping a less interventionist disposed president from getting back into office. And that's why they so ferociously for somebody else where they can bring back all the old tropes, all the old rhetoric, all the old techniques to get us involved in an escalating path to military adventurism, 8 or 9 time zones away.
So are we going to say that we think this is going to last like 10 years, like Vietnam did? Is that what we're going to? What's the end game? How's it going to end?
Well, it looks like there's some signs that they might be trying to wind things down with the U.S. I've seen some just comments from people in Congress, and there's some reports that Biden offered, Putin 20% of Ukraine. There's a report in Swedish media that said that to stop the war. But then again, you have Russia gearing up for this big offensive that looks like it's going to be coming pretty soon.
Yeah, he's in this sociology of social problem business too. All these, keep the people fear and mobilized.
Gentlemen, can I ask one question? Where do you get your information from? Because I find it very difficult to ascertain what is truthful, what is propaganda, especially in a nation at war like we are, or even if proxy war. Where do you find the most reliable information, or do you get a conglomerate of different opinions and then try to hash it out yourselves?
I would say antiwar.com is a pretty good source.
Oh yeah. I'm supposed to.
That's the first thing about to come out of my mouth as well.
Supposed to say, with
I
antiwar.com.
mean, that is like my job actually, because I cover the news. And some stuff, like I don't really focus on the battlefield stuff because it's just so hard to track. I kind of just do updates once in a while when you see like some territory has changed hands, but it really is tough. I mean, I basically sort through just reports all day, hundreds of news articles, kind of mostly from like mainstream media, and you got to figure out, the truth is in there somewhere. You kind of got to pick it out. And so that is kind of a big part of my job. And for some of the stuff, again, like, the claims on the battlefield, it's just so hard to know. And you just kind of got to, assume both sides are lying to some degree with some of this stuff, and then just sit back and sometimes wait. Because these days you have people, are on social media and have all these videos that come out and claiming certain things. And sometimes it's better just to kind of wait and let a story develop before you start reporting on it.
I'm a theoretician, economist theoretician, and I build these models. And this model is, it's like dog bites man. To see it unfold, what's the surprise? And then the other, interventions in the Ukraine in 2014, which we haven't covered, which are now also becoming uncovered. I wanted to share. Has anybody heard of Kash Patel?
Yes.
Yeah.
Chief of staff to one of the last Trump secretaries of defense.
Right. So he has a new book out called Government Gangsters. So what we were John asked, so what happened to Kennedy and what happened to Nixon? And so what are we talking about, a deep state here? Is the military industrial complex really that greedy for money and power that they
in basic terms, there is an establishment. So we don't have to necessarily say establishment or deep state, but there is an establishment, and it's national and international, and it wants to go in a certain direction.
Unipolar. They want a unipolar single world government.
There's always been a debate about which set of globalists will be running things. Will it be globalists in the United States running the world through NATO and other bodies, or will it be just the international body without the U.S., with the U.S. only serving as its police force?
Well, that's funny, John. That's exactly the state of Republican of our the American democracy, where the states get less and less power and the central government gets more and more. So that's a prognosis to look for. So anyway, Kash Patel has this book out called Government Gangsters. And what he says, the tell-all that Pentagon wants shelved. Glad you asked. I read a lot in the New York Post. I think they're good at journalism because they dislike what the state does and calls them out on it, and it's a quick read. But this is what Kash Patel said. We pay billions for products we don't need for wars we don't need to be in. Then when the generals and officers who pushed for and elongated those wars get out of the military, they are rewarded with a big fat paycheck by the very companies making all those high-priced goods for the Department of Defense.
I mean, look who's leading the Pentagon right now. Lloyd Austin came straight from Raytheon. He was on the board of Raytheon. Even before that, Mark Esper, Trump's, I think he was also Raytheon. And then I know James Mattis worked for General Dynamics. Yeah. Then he went to the Pentagon. And then he went back to General Dynamics after. Mm-hmm. And he resigned because Trump said he was going to pull out of Syria. But unfortunately, he never did. But yeah, okay. I mean, they talk about the revolving door. It used to be more so lower level officials, but now it's just so blatant.
Like, well, those CIA advisors are also, of course, that we're sending to Ukraine, of course, are revolving door as well. Mm-hmm. So our director says our time's up. So that was quite a good discussion on Ukraine as Vietnam. Thank you very much. Thank you, John, Brooklyn Vlad, and Dave. We'll see you next time on Hardfire TV.